It happened during the summer of 2016, a time when my parents often traveled for holidays and left me home for 2 weeks to look after our 4 dogs and tend to the garden. I'd gotten used to being alone, but that didn't mean I wasn't scared sometimes. I had already experienced being followed home on several occasions, and our neighborhood, still new at the time, was surrounded by thick, quiet forests. Junkies sometimes wandered through the trees or hung around near the path I used to take to the shops. Still, home always felt safe. Most of our neighbors were my dad's close friends, and the entire property was wrapped in a tall fence topped with sharp metal, spikes impossible to climb over without getting hurt. Inside those walls, with 4 big dogs by my side, I always managed to feel protected. The first couple of days passed without anything unusual. Occasionally, I heard dull thuds in the garden, but that wasn't out of the ordinary. It was usually just the martins messing with my mom's flowers, something they did so often that even my dogs didn't bother reacting anymore. On the 3rd day, I finally needed to go to the shop, but because I'd been busy all day, I ended up going in the evening right when the light was fading. Not my smartest choice. I bought what I needed and started home along my usual path, a stretch that wound through a forest park area where people often walked their dogs. As I walked, texting on my phone, I noticed a man I had passed earlier suddenly rise from a bench and start following behind me. At first, I tried to calm myself by thinking he was just a neighbor heading the same direction, so I kept walking. When I left the forest and stepped onto the regular road lined with houses, he was still behind me. I told myself maybe he lived on the street, but as house after house passed, I realized he didn't belong to this neighborhood. And when he stayed behind me, even as I approached the final turn to my street, fear finally kicked in. Thankfully, my neighbor, the one living to the left of my house, was outside watering his plants. He looked up and immediately noticed my uneasy expression. Knowing my parents were away, he called out to me. The moment the man behind me saw that someone else was there, he turned and bolted back toward the forest. I exhaled the breath I'd been holding in, talked to my neighbor for a moment, then hurried inside and called my parents. They reassured me, as they always did, that everything was fine. The neighborhood was safe. I had the dogs. Nothing would happen, but something did. I always slept in my parents' downstairs room when they were away, mainly because it stopped the dogs from going upstairs in the dark and possibly hurting themselves. That night, I lay in bed reading, all 4 dogs asleep near me, though I could tell they still sensed my earlier anxiety. Then I heard it, the same thud as before, but this time right outside the window of the room next to mine. I told myself it was the martins again, but then my dog suddenly got up, stiffened, and growled directly at the bedroom window. A second thud came, this time right on my window. My heartbeat tripled. A third hit louder, sharper, followed by bangs echoing around the entire house, moving from one window to the next as if someone was testing every single one. That's when I knew this wasn't an animal. This wasn't nothing. Someone was outside, and he was trying to get in. Trembling, I slipped out of my room and into the center of the house where I had a clear view of the main door. That's when I saw him, a dark figure standing directly outside, peeking through the small window pane and pounding on it with increasing force. I dropped to the floor and crawled behind the dining table, clutching my phone with shaking hands. I dialed my dad. No answer. Called again. Still no answer. On the 3rd try, my mom finally picked up, sounding groggy and confused about why I was calling at 2 a.m. She didn't stay confused for long. The man's furious banging was so loud she could hear it through the phone. My dad immediately began calling everyone he could. My uncle, our close neighbors, even my anyone who lived close enough to reach me fast. And thank God they did. The same neighbor who had rescued me earlier that day was the first to arrive. Just the sound of someone approaching was enough to scare the intruder into running toward the backyard. I didn't dare open the door, not even when I heard familiar voices outside. 10 minutes later, my uncle, aunt, and grandma all reached the house. My uncle had a spare key. He unlocked the front door and let the dogs loose. Those dogs were hunting breeds, not forgiving to strangers. My uncle and a neighbor grabbed flashlights and followed the dogs into the backyard, searching every corner. I will never forget the moment my grandma and aunt came inside and found me, curled under the table, crying and gripping the leg of a chair like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The man had escaped, likely climbing into the neighbor's garden behind, hours to avoid the dogs. But he didn't leave before leaving his mark. The small window in the main door was cracked, and the entire frame had been bent from how violently he had tried to force his way in. I still shudder, thinking about what would have happened if help hadn't arrived as quickly as it did. The last half of 2017 had already drained every ounce of energy out of me, but nothing compared to the emotional weight of moving my father into an aged care facility. His health had declined so quickly that keeping him at home was no longer safe. He lived in Tasmania, where I grew up, but I now worked full-time in Brisbane, with nearly 1,500 miles between us. Every decision became heavier, every trip more exhausting. For months, I was flying back and forth twice a month, 3.5 hours each way, handling paperwork, clearing his old house, repairing what I could, and preparing everything for sale. The house itself sat in a semi-rural pocket of bushland, surrounded by overgrown trees that scratched at the siding whenever the wind picked up. With no electricity running, no heating, and no alarm system, the house felt like a dark, hollow shell. Every step echoed, every door creaked, and every night inside felt colder than the last. Christmas Eve, I flew into Tasmania again. After picking up my rental car, I stopped by a friend's home just 10 minutes from Dad's place. A few drinks turned into a couple of hours of laughter and stories. I realized I had drunk too much to drive safely. My friend's wife offered to drop me off at Dad's house and pick me up in the morning to get my car. I agreed, grateful. I reached the house just after midnight. Everything was swallowed in darkness. Out of habit, I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Then I remembered no power. Using my phone flashlight, I made my way inside. That's when I noticed something was wrong. Some of the tools I had left lying around were missing. The place had been empty for weeks, so I assumed some local kids had broken in to grab whatever they could. The idea wasn't comforting, but I wasn't about to call the police over a missing hammer, wrench, and screwdriver. At least the heavy power toolbox in the laundry cupboard was still there. The padlock had deep scratches all over it, as though someone had tried hard to break it open, but it held. The toolbox was nearly too heavy for one person to lift anyway. Exhausted, I gathered the pile of blankets and pillows I kept in the house for overnight stays and made a makeshift bed on the floor of one of the empty bedrooms. I lay down, listening to the wind rustle through the overgrown trees. Eventually, the ringing in my ears drowned most of the outside noise, and slowly my eyes grew heavier. Then crunch, footsteps on the gravel driveway. My heart jolted awake. I lifted my head slightly, trying to hear better. A second later, something slammed loudly against the metal railing by the back stairs. I bolted upright, pulse racing. Maybe it was a wallaby or a possum, I tried telling myself. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. The wind rustled again. Silence followed. Then, with a soft pop and a long, high squeak, the back door slowly pushed open. I froze. Footsteps creaked into the hallway's low, deliberate, careful. I felt the air leave my lungs as I lay flat on the floor, terrified to even breathe. Then came another sound. The metal clink of the laundry cupboard door. Someone was in the house. Someone was right outside my bedroom. Hand shaking, I pulled my phone under the blanket, called the police, and whispered as quietly as I could. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way and suggested I lock the bedroom door. I knew she was right, so I rose slowly. But when I stepped forward, one of the loose floorboards gave a sharp, loud crack. Everything in the house went dead silent. I stood perfectly still, barely able to swallow. 30 seconds passed. Then I tried taking another step. Another creak. It turned out to be enough. From the laundry, I heard quick footsteps retreating. Then the back door swinging open as the intruders fled into the night. I hurried to the door, locked it, and told the dispatcher they were gone. She told me to stay put. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the house and the yard, but found no one. One of the officers eyed the toolbox and muttered, if they wanted in that badly, they should have just brought bolt cutters. Then I told him about the missing tools when I first arrived. His theory was simple. They were here earlier tonight, he said. Took what they could, tried to break into the toolbox, failed, and left to get something stronger. Before they returned, you came home. They didn't realize When they came back, they weren't expecting you here. He thought they weren't dangerous, probably teenagers or inexperienced thieves. Still, the timing was terrifying. Had I arrived even 10 minutes later, I might have walked straight into them. After filing a report, I stayed awake until the sun finally rose. I managed to get 2 hours of sleep before Lucy came to pick me up. I asked her and her husband if I could store my tools at their place, and they warmly agreed. Later, I visited Dad at the care home for Christmas lunch. Watching him smile with the other residents eased something inside me. Before leaving Tasmania, I bought new lock sticker, stronger, impossible to shoulder open, and installed them myself. For the first time in weeks, the house finally felt like it could breathe again, and so could I.